And I will give you a shout when you've got 3 minutes left on the message chats.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Schrader, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, and thank you very much for a really good film, a great film.
Oh.
I really enjoyed it. Could we start just by you just talking a little bit about where this story came from, the genesis of the story?
You know, people assume that maybe it came from, you know, Abu Ghraib and wanted to say it, but no, it wasn't that. And it wasn't so much poker. There's a certain kind of character I like. He always turns out to be a man. And he has an occupation which has another level to it. And I saw these guys playing card players on TV. I thought, you know, there's another level there. They're sitting there in their real lives playing 10, 12 hours of cards a day. And they're just running numbers. What's underneath that profession? So I started to imagine it's kind of half-life of someone who's not fully alive, not fully dead, who's just waiting, and he chooses to play cards while he waits. Well, why is he waiting? Well, he's waiting for judgment. He's done something, and he's been forgiven, but he hasn't forgiven himself. So and then you start to think, well, what could be so terrible that it's not forgivable? You know, a serial killer or anybody, you know, it's all cliches. And then all of a sudden you remember Abu Ghraib. And you say that now, people will understand that that's unforgivable because you haven't hurt another person. You've hurt the very image and identity of your own nation. And after you die and everyone else is dead, that stain will be on there. That stain will never go away. And nothing you can do about it. And I said, you know, that's a level of guilt that I think people understand. And I, you know, was born into a culture, Dutch Calvinists who believe in guilt. Believe you're born guilty and you get guiltier. And you're responsible for everything. And we live in a culture where people aren't responsible. I didn't lie to you, I misspoke. So I said, you know, what if somebody like this, who feels the weight of what he's done, and he talks about there's a weight that man can accrue through his past actions that can never be lifted. So that's how the idea started. I was in the front room working with this character and the card players, and Abu Ghraib came in the back room.
I was just wondering, you said before you like a certain kind of character, and there are, of course, in a way, thematic or psychological, you could say, similarities between this film and quite a lot of your other films in terms of this kind of existentially conflicted, traumatized male character. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you find so fascinating about probing these steps of these men.
I'm kind of good at it. I figured out how to do it. And when I first did it on Taxi Driver, even way back then, I realized that I was not working from a film tradition. I was working from the tradition of 20th century literature, primarily European literature, the existential hero, Dostoevsky, Sartre, Camus. And then I was taking like that tradition and putting it on film. And I came up with that because films often are all about intercutting, you know, the good guys, the bad guys, his life, her life. This is all just one guy all the time, all the time, all the time. And just like those novels are. And so that very much appealed to me, because at that time I was a film critic. I didn't think I was going to be a screenwriter. And then I saw Pickpocket, and I said, oh, I could make a film like that. That's just a guy who sits in a room and writes, and then he goes out and writes some more. And so finally, when I wrote Taxi Driver, that's what it was. You know, it was like Pickpocket in a car.
Yeah, and also there's, I guess, the ending of the card counter is a direct reference to the pickpocket in a sense.
Yeah. It's like, again, this notion of, to be truly free, one has to submit to some sort of prison. And I think that is often, also part of my background, and so that I had a very restricted religious background, and I'm not complaining. It was in many ways a good thing, but I had to flee. I had to get away. And one of the places I ran to was Japan. And I was in Tokyo, and I said, they're even more restricted here. But I feel free here because it's not my restrictions. It's not my parents. It's them. And so that sort of notion of finding freedom inside the bars of a prison or a culture or an occupation, whatever.
Is that also why your films are so kind of, they're very chaste in a way, your films, you could argue, minimalist in a sense? Is that a kind of giving you I wouldn't say a
they're also
prison?
relatively chaste sexually. I mean, when I wrote Taxi Driver, we didn't have the word incel. But, that's what Travis Bickle was. He was an incel. So there's a kind of puritanical self-righteousness to this sacrifice and anger, and so when I get a chance to make a film like First Reformed, where you can take all the decoration off the walls, and have it look like a house from Carl Dreyer, I love that.
And also in this film where he drapes all his room at the motels totally in white, in a sense. Yeah. And is that also something you do as a filmmaker when you make the film? Is that something you think about, that it has to be as puritanical or as minimalist as possible?
Well, it's part of the conception. I could never make a film like Leo Carax.
No.
I could never make Holy Moly or in that. I could never do whimsy. I could never do outrageousness. Whatever I'm going to do is always going to be very defined. It's the kind of art I like, the kind of music I like. So it is going to circle back in that way. And to me, the ideal decoration is 3 blank walls, a cot, and a cross.
Would you say that, with all you've told me so far, would you say that your films are autobiographical, not perhaps in what happens, but in the psychological sense?
Yeah, but I've tried a couple times to get near something autobiographical, and the closer I got, the more I failed. So I don't know if you know this new film by Paolo Sorrentino called Hand of God. Well, it's about his upbringing, about his childhood. I could never do that. And there has to be some metaphor between me as the author and me as the character. And whether that's a taxi cab or a drug deal or a minister, something has to stand in between us.
These films, or this film, but also some of your other films, are about, as we spoke about, these conflicted men, existentially traumatized men. But they also seem to be about America, in a sense, about America lost, America looking for its soul, perhaps, or its America looking for redemption.
Yeah, well, that sort of just comes almost with the territory. So you have this lonely, angry kid in New York, and people, he had a military jacket on, so people assume he was in Vietnam. Vietnam was never discussed, but that's the climate that creates that guy, the PSTD that creates that guy. And so you read that in. And here, you know, I was just looking for something that would make him feel the burden of guilt. And it ended up being not just his guilt, but national guilt. He wasn't just guilty for the things he did. He was guilty for the things the nation did. And that sort of just came with it. But it didn't begin that way.
At one point, he says that in order to survive, he had to surf the craziness. And there was something I thought was quite interesting, especially, well, if you take the time, if you think about the time we live in now, but also the time we lived in during Donald Trump, or you lived in as Americans, was that a kind of, you have to surf the craziness to survive?
Yeah, you have to sort of go with the madness, or you become mad. So if you're in one of these situations, you adapt, and then you're out of it, and then you have to deal with the fact that you adapted to it.
So that's the danger of being a human being in this world we live in right now.
Yeah, well, the spookiest line in the film is after Defoe walks off, he says in voiceover, "He was right. I had it in me." You know, Defoe says, "You got the right stuff, kid." You know, so he was right, and we all have to acknowledge that at some point we have it in us. We could all go to the dark side, and for some of it, it's not a very long trip at all.
One final question. The prison scenes are quite interesting in the way they're shot. I wonder, I think with a kind of anamorphic lens or something like that. Could you talk a little bit about just that?
Well, it's a 6.5 millimeter lens,
yeah.
Which means that it sees the ceiling, the wall, the floor, and the walls. The only thing it really doesn't see is the operator. So it just wraps around everybody, and you have that kind of VR feeling. And I didn't have the time or the money to recreate Battle Zone, so I had to do it in a kind of mental landscape. And this idea of building a maze, because the real Abu Ghraib wasn't. The real Abu Ghraib was just a rectangle, you know. But now he's in a maze, you know, he's coming in and out of it. In this wide angle maze that surrounds him. So that that became a way I could get inside of his head without busting the bank, building sets and shooting for days and days.
And it works very well.
Yeah.
Well, I think our time is up. Thank you very much, Mr. Schrader.
All right, Christian.
It's been a pleasure.
Good luck.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Christian. I'll send you the recording tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay.